May I speak in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain." Jesus led Peter, James, and John up a high mountain by themselves. In 1950, a French climber called Maurice Herzog led the first exhibition to successfully summit and return from Annapurna, the Himalayan peak in north-central Nepal. It was one of the most dangerous exhibitions ever completed and was the first 8,000-meter peaks ever successfully climbed. Herzog wrote about it in a book called Annapurna, in which he recounts a mystical experience at the peak of the mountain. He writes, "I felt as though I were plunging into something new and quite abnormal. I had the strangest and most vivid impressions, such as I had never known in the mountains before. There was something unnatural in the way I saw La Canal," his climbing partner, "and everything else around us. I smiled to myself at the paltriness of our efforts, for I could stand apart and watch myself making these efforts. But all sense of exertion was gone, as though there were no longer any gravity. This diaphanous landscape, this quintessence of purity, these were not the mountains I knew. These were the mountains of my dreams." Those of us who aren't mountaineers, which I imagine are most of us, but who love a good hill climb, will know of the wonder, awe, and sense of achievement that we get when we reach to the top and that opens out in front of us the most magnificent view. Some of us perhaps have even had some kind of mystical experience or sense of the divine on top of a mountain or hill. And of course, we're not alone in this if we have. It was on a mountain that Moses encountered God in the flames of the burning bush, where God revealed his name and commissions him to go to the Pharaoh and release the captive Israelites. And it was on another mountain in the reading we heard this morning where Moses encounters God again in the glory of the cloud and is given the tablets of the covenant. One of the words for God in Hebrew is El Shaddai, God of the mountain. And so it's not surprising that it's on a mountain that the full glory of who Jesus is revealed to the disciples. Rather like Maurice Herzog's experience on Annapurna, the transfiguration has a dreamlike quality to it. Jesus' face shines like the sun, his clothes glimmer, a bright cloud overshadows them. He's joined by Moses, who represents the law, and Elijah, who embodies the great prophets. And into this visual scene, there's an audible voice from heaven. The disciples fall over in awe and fear. It's one of those moments when the boundary between heaven and earth seems to open up and they intermingle. The other moment in the Gospels is that moment of Jesus' baptism, and both share almost the same words. "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." It's a moment where Jesus' divinity is revealed in all its glory, and it's fleeting, because almost as soon as they experience it, it's gone, and they're left with Jesus alone. It's unlikely that many of us will be able to say we've had a mountaintop experience, anything like as dramatic as that experienced by Peter, James, and John. But we may be able to recall times when we've experienced something of the glory of God. Perhaps not as dramatic, but wow moments. Probably just glimpses. St. Paul says, as through a glass darkly, or reflected in a mirror. That sense of deep, inexplicable peace when at prayer, or when an answer to prayer is answered in a way that seems really quite extraordinary. Or a eureka moment when suddenly you get the answer to something you've been grappling with and you can't quite explain where it came from. Or that moment when somebody pops into our minds and then we find that at that moment they really needed our prayers. We get these glimpses of God, these mountaintop moments, and we're to be thankful for them as they can sustain us, especially in dark times and in the wilderness times. But we can't capture them or hold on to them. On seeing the glory of God in the mountaintop, Peter, who almost always verbalizes the wrong thing that everyone else is thinking, and Peter wants to capture the moment. He suggests they might build tents and says, "It is good for us to be here." And we know that temptation when something is good to want to hold on to it, like when we're on a wonderful holiday or in a fabulous place and we decide we'd like to stay there forever. But that's not what that moment is for. It was good, but it can't be held on to. Jesus brought the disciples up so they could witness who he truly was, that his divinity would be revealed to them, but that this would sustain them for what was to come. And what was to come was Jesus' journey to Jerusalem, Jesus' arrest and death, and each of them would be challenged in their faith. When Moses came down from his mountaintop, he found the Israelites had forgotten everything they'd been taught, and they'd begun building and worshipping golden calves. He had work to do. The Christian life is not to be lived out in the heights, on the mountaintops, but in the depths. Rowan Williams writes that the Christian life is in the depths of human need, including the depths of our own selves, but also in the depths of God's love, in the depths where the Spirit is recreating and refreshing human life as God meant it to be. Maurice Herzog said of his experience on the mountaintop, Annapurna, to which we had gone empty-handed, was a treasure on which we could live out the rest of our days. With this realization, we turn the page and new life begins. I believe that it's down the mountaintop that this life takes place, and that we need people who have this treasure, who shine with God's radiance. People who are transfigured into radical bearers of God's inclusive love. People who love their neighbor, who use their gifts fully, who are fully alive with faces that shine with life, who are hope-filled, who love and care for creation. This Sunday is the Sunday before we enter the season of Lent, the wilderness season in the Christian calendar. And so as we enter into that, it's good to remember the glimpses of glory that we've been given, as these will sustain us. And a question we might ask ourselves as we move into this season of Lent is, how might we model our lives so that we would pay attention to these glimpses of glory. Because they're so easy to miss. We're busy, we're distracted, we have things to do. So I have 2 thoughts to leave us with when thinking of this question, how we might model our lives to pay attention to these glimpses of glory. Firstly, by making space to notice, to listen, to pay attention. Peter, in our second reading, says, "You will do well to be attentive to this as to a lamp shining in a dark place." And we can't do that if every waking moment is filled with work and busyness, screens and social media updates. The 40 days of Lent are a good time to create a new habit or to let go of one that's destructive, or to add in space in our lives with God. One idea is to come along to the Cathedral Lent course, Come and See, meeting each Tuesday from next week. Secondly, in thinking of how we might model our lives to pay attention, we could pay attention to where we feel most alive. Where do we think our eyes shine and our face glows? That might be through the really simple things of life, like listening to beautiful music, painting, baking a cake, speaking up about something we care about. Because this is where God is. God is not just on the mountaintop. God is with us when we're filled with his Spirit and living lives that are fully alive. And so have those mountaintop experiences, but be prepared then to be sent down into the plains, to reflect Jesus amongst those we live and work amongst. There's a lovely book on prayer with the title, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, and I rather like that. And to finish with a quote from C.S. Lewis in his sermon, Weight of Glory. "Heaven beckons, but meanwhile there's Monday morning."